Focusing on Borden is committed to teaching focusing in a way where it's safe to explore embodied connections to deeper places within ourselves. So they're a great community, and I'm so grateful to be part of them. So that's where I come from in Toronto. So today I'm going to talk about some theory. Oops, I can say it. About parts, both related to the mind and how they are in the body. I'm going to talk about Jan's model, the felt sense experience model. I'll look at Richard Schwartz's internal family systems and a deeper dive into the 8 C's that he names. And then we'll look at this idea of body cards and using those to record focusing sessions, especially with parts. I'll talk a bit about my story, and there'll be a couple experientials throughout. So the theory. So the parts in the mind go way back to Freud with the id and the ego and the superego. And the connection with parts in the body started with Jung. There's a quote here that parts have a sort of body, a certain amount of its own physiology. So the parts part into the body goes way back. And more recent research looks at subpersonalities, that the mind has multiple parts. And there's even been more recent research, split brain research, that showed that there are special roles with the mind, and yes, and that it's composed of semi-autonomous functioning modules. So there's been a variety of research talking about parts. And so this is some of this background information. And then when you go into the body, I want to talk a bit about polyvagal, and then I'll get into the 2 main models that I used. So polyvagal theory comes from Stephen Porges, and I think most of you probably have heard about fight or flight. So that's this middle area where, you know, we're activated and we are maybe overwhelmed, feeling a feeling of overwhelm. And what Stephen Porges did is he realized that the vagus has 2 parts: the ventral vagus, which is a nerve, and is part of our autonomic nervous system. And the autonomic nervous system controls all kinds of bodily functions, like heart rate, digestion, respiration. And so there's kind of 3 parts, and the 3 parts have kind of evolved over time. So the dorsal vagal part is the oldest part, and the response is to freeze. So when you think of, say, like a lizard, for example, when you come across a lizard, often the first thing they do is they freeze. They just, and then they run away maybe. And the sympathetic fight or flight is evolved after that. And the most recent one to evolve is our social engagement system. And this has a lot to do with our face, eye contact, expression, tone of voice, direction, emotion. And so what the research shows is that we will first try to feel safe by using our social engagement system, by connecting with other people. And if that doesn't feel safe, then we'll go to fight or flight. We'll maybe run away, or be argumentative or something. And then finally, if that doesn't work, then we go into freeze. And so that's just some background on polyvagal theory, which I thought was important to share because it's integral to Jan's model. So I'm going to move on to that now. So here is Jan Winhill's model of the felt sense experience of emotional regulation. And so she's got 4 parts, and the bottom 3 parts are from that polyvagal theory. So this bottom integrated self is that social engagement system that we call the ventral vagus. Then over here, you have chaos, which is the sympathetic part, that middle part. And then the third response is over here, which is the dorsal vagus. And so what Jan realized as she had worked with clients, so she worked a lot with clients with addiction and serious cases, is that she would notice these state shifts between people, that sometimes they were grounded, and then there was very flooded emotional states, and then there was these very shut down states. But then there was, of course, also, because she was working with addiction, these other parts that would show up that were addicted. And so she mapped this out, and it's, I kind of think of it as like a dance floor. We can be in different parts of the dance floor. And so I wouldn't think about this as completely separate states, but they're like, you can be kind of really grounded, or maybe you're a little bit activated, but you're still kind of grounded. And you can be that way because multiple parts can be active at the same time. And I'll get into that some more. A few things to note about this model is that it was also built on some other theory that I won't get into specifically, but attachment theory. So you'll see here on here, there's secure attachment and insecure at the top. So attachment is integral to this, but I won't get into that, as well as more on addiction theory. And then I'll just spend a little bit of time looking at this part here, process skipping. So, and point out two things. So we can be in any area on the dance floor, and if we are moving into these chaotic emotional states where there's a lot of emotion, or a shutdown state, those places don't feel that comfortable to be in. So we often will try to get ourselves out of it eventually. And there's two ways to do that. You can have a felt shift and ground naturally with yourself and your body. And, you know, we use breath, we use maybe walking or nature. There's many ways, sounding, music. There's different ways to ground and come into the body. Connection, people. Of course, we talked about the social engagement system. Or people will do some sort of process skipping. They might, you know, have a drink of wine, go shopping. There's porn. There's excessive exercise. There's all these different ways that we can use to skip being in that state and the feelings that are underlying that state. And at the extreme of that, on the spectrum, it could turn into an addiction. But we all have things that we do. And there's some of the things I'll get into in a bit that are process skipping that we don't think of as process skipping necessarily, like pleasing behavior. So just to move on. So a different way to think about these areas, which might be a little bit easier to think of, are, so we already talked about fight or flight and sympathetic. With the grounded place, there's this idea of flock. And that word actually came out in the community, in the focusing community, after Donald Trump was elected. There was a lot of people that noticed that they were flocking to their community to be together. And it's so that's where that word came from, flock. But I will note that also that there's a downside to that. And Brene Brown talks about how when we flock, we also go into our own tribes and we isolate. And so there's also a need to, as much as we flock to our little groups that we thinking of other parts, which is kind of interesting at a global level, connected to the need to be compassionate with others, just the way we need to be compassionate with parts of ourselves, which I'll get into in a bit. And then I mentioned freeze, I think already. And then you can think of fixate on something. I need to watch that TV show now. I can't do anything else. So those words might be easier, and I might refer to those rather than some of the other more complicated states. But anyway, but just to say that there's all these different ways of categorizing, but they're the same kind of 4 boxes that we're looking at, basically. All right. So, so internal family systems is a body of work created by Richard Schwartz. It's a model of psychotherapy, and he really combined 3 paradigms in creating his model. There was the multiplicity of the mind, which I showed earlier, which was that psychology research about the mind. He combined systems thinking and self-leadership. And so And just to say that as opposed to some trauma therapies that think that subpersonalities are a sign of pathology, here we're really thinking that parts are helpful. So what he teaches is that all parts are innately valuable components of a healthy mind, and that each submind has its own perspectives and talents and resources, and they contribute to the whole system. And just to note that I want to say I'm not a therapist, right? I have a science and business background, as Henry mentioned in the intro, and that I know some people teach that some parts maybe are needing to be cleared like critics, and so I think for everybody you have to see where you're at and know, like, maybe some, like with anything, take what is valuable to you, and some of it at some points may not be valuable, and so you leave that. So for some people, you might have a nasty critic and you might not want to work with it right away, or maybe ever, and you might want to always clear it, and so that's fine, but do what you want. So in internal family systems, the idea is that trauma doesn't create these parts, but instead forces them out of their natural functioning into playing these other extreme roles rather than their healthy states. And so the goal isn't to eliminate parts here, but to help them relax and no longer have to be so protective so that they can return to their natural states. And so in that way, you might think that the part is eliminated, and actually Anne Weiser Cornell teaches that parts can disseminate, go away. And I think that's probably largely true, although I think there's always kind of a bit left, and sometimes there's a root that maybe in a different situation, you might think that you've completely healed this part and it's not an issue, that trauma's gone, and then in a different situation, like it comes up at work versus a family situation, and something can come back. So so largely the part transforms, but the original trauma can always have a bit of a charge in certain situations, maybe, and because they're complicated, right? These things interweave in our lives, as you'll see later in my timeline. And so one branch might be fixed, but a smaller branch might still have some charge to it and be not yet carried forward, be still stopped. Okay. So the thing about internal family systems, which I really like, is the different categories. And these are similar to other systems. So most people talk about wounded parts. So they're parts that are hurt or humiliated and frightened. In internal family systems, they call this exiles. So they really, it's like they're not allowed out and they're pushed down. But they're always there, and if you don't work with them and help that part carry forward, then it's blocked and stopped. The protector parts are the parts that manage and protect you from that wounding, and there's kind of two branches of that. There's the parts that are kind of day-to-day keeping things working, and then there's the parts that jump in as soon as there's some emotion. And we just talked about that middle part in Jan's model, where if you're active in something, you're maybe going to want to shift out of it. And if you do a process skipping or a firefighter thing, you're using some either substance or behavior to shift out of those hurt feelings. And then third is the third main category is grounded. And so what I really have liked is that, and I'll show you the 8 C's next, is that that the grounded self is complicated, that there's multiple parts, and that actually working with the parts of the grounded self can be really helpful, and that's a big part of the work that I'm going to present today. And then finally, what's really interesting in internal family systems is that what is taught is that all of those parts, the wounded parts and the protector parts, that they can be asked to step back. That when they are asked to step back, that they often will if they feel safe, if they're being listened to, by like a focusing partner, for example, and that there's somebody there who's holding the space, or yourself, that they will step back, and then underneath is always the self. And so it's not something we need to create, it's always there, and we're just tapping into it. And I think that is really inspiring and helpful. So I will carry on. And so this is really messy, but just to kind of map out, the grounded are down here with that grounded place, this, you know, social engagement, very grounded in the body place. You see it's small to see, but grounded place is, I refer mostly to it as the grounded place. So that's there. And then these other three kinds of parts, they kind of move around. So as I'll get into some examples, the wounded and the managers, they can both be quite rigid and frozen, or dissociated. I didn't use that word, but often we talk about I keep losing my mouse. We talk about this area as being dissociated, or the wounded can be quite overly emotional. And so these wounded and protectors, they kind of are in the middle. And then the process skippers, the firefighters, they move up more into this process skipping in addicted space. Okay. Yes, and I've already kind of mentioned that that they can be in different spots. So what are the 8 C's? I think this is really interesting. And I've grouped these into 3 kind of buckets. So the first 4 C's are, oh, I'm noticing the question. Oh.
Sorry, I'll answer.
Yep. Okay, sorry, good. Okay, so the first 4 C's are really kind of elemental to focusing. I think we learn them as we focus. So the first one is calmness, and to me that's almost synonymous with grounding. It's being in the body and calm. And you know, step 1 in focusing, when we clear space, we often start with breath work or a body scan. There's different ways, or even in piling things up right beside us. That helps the body calm and ground and be in the body. And so that's kind of innate. And then connectedness is also innate to focusing, because we are having a focusing partner, or even if we're focusing on our own, we're really listening to ourselves, and we're connecting to ourselves and our partner with that listening piece. And so it's just there. And curiosity as well, right? We're going to the edge of our experience. We're being with the felt sense, this murky spot, and we're being curious about it. We're going like, hey, what's next? And we're engaging with that, and doing that, of course, by asking our questions and focusing. So we know all of that already. Clarity, we also kind of know, right? As we work with the felt sense and things emerge, and there's a shift, or information comes from the asking step, we gain clarity. But we can also gain clarity of the parts that are active in our felt sense, and I'm going to get into that more in a bit. And so that part I find quite helpful, because when you know which parts of you are active in your felt sense, and as you get to know the felt sense of the parts, which I'll show in a bit, it becomes easier or faster to identify that something is happening, and it adds to that awareness piece. So for example, I learned early on that one of my hurt parts, my arms would get cold when it was active, and so now sometimes I'll notice that that I'm getting cold, and I'm like, oh, nothing changed. The temperature in the room hasn't changed. I'm just sitting here. Is something happening? And then usually that's why I've gotten cold, is something in my psyche or some thought process has activated or touched on that hurt part. So the next group of C's that I've grouped as crossing. And what is really cool is that when you activate these parts and bring them into a focusing session, we can change what we can do in the session. So for example, if we're being compassionate with ourselves, we can have a dialogue, and it changes the information and the questions that we ask, and what can emerge from the session, and similarly with confidence and courage. And what I found is that we can all find examples in our lives when we've been compassionate, confident, or courageous. We've been compassionate either with a child or a loved one, a pet. We have had these experiences. We've had something go well in life where we've been confident, and we have done something at some point, usually to be a bit risky. And what we do is we kind of forget that we have those parts sometimes when we're stuck in an issue, because we're just stuck in the two parts. One wants to go this way, one wants to go that way, and bringing in the relevant C can just slightly remind ourselves that we can do this, or change the conversation, and it just creates a space and brings that part of the self forward to facilitate a better dialogue. And what I recently came across is this idea of a neural bridge. And so we've probably heard the expression before that neurons that fire together wire together. Daniel Siegel says something similar, and this comes from Donald Hebb from 1949. It's been around for a while. And I think that's what happens, is when we're focusing and bringing in a part of ourselves into this situation that normally that part isn't active, then we're starting to create connections, and then we can change the neuroplasticity of the situation starts to change, and you don't automatically just get stuck in the situation, or you can actually resolve it, so that situation doesn't arise anymore. And then the last C is creativity. And in my experience, creativity just kind of naturally flows. It's not a part that I pull up necessarily, but it's a thing that just kind of happens. When you've created space, it moves. And so we notice that with, the felt shift like carries forward. We create a space to focus, and then suddenly there's a shift that happens, and we don't like make it happen. We're not like thinking it to happen. And Elizabeth Gilbert has a TED talk from a while back where she talks about how back in the day we used to talk about having a genius versus being a genius. And it was this idea that sometimes something just comes. You might, like a dancer might just have a really awesome night dancing, and it can't recreate that there's something about the situation and something that comes. And I think that's a very interesting way of thinking about creativity. But that the more space we create by working through some of our parts and our wounds and trauma and stuff, that parts of us can return to creativity, but also that it's not something that we can control, the way the crossings with working with these other ones work. So, all right. So I'm going to move on. Actually, I'm going to pause. Is there any questions on this section? I will just give a second.
I also want to say that while you're looking at the screen, and you'll notice that Annette's image might be a little small, so you could stretch that out. You can also double click on Zoom to make it full screen. And if you put your mouse around Annette's little box, you can make her bigger.
Great. Okay. So crossing parts and focusing and body cards. So, so this work started in 2015, and at Focusing on Boarding, we were going to do a course on ego states, and we were going to unpack a problem. And so we were talking about this, and I had recently seen this research, and I don't know if I have the year here.
I'm going to interrupt you. There was someone who mentioned during the Q&A session. So
yes.
Elizabeth asks, can you treat allergies with focusing?
Treat allergies with focusing. I've never done it, but I actually think you can treat anything with focusing. I think you could, if you dialogue with the felt sense of that thing, there's probably always some information that will come. So
I have treated my allergies with focusing. And it's very obvious that I'll be in a dysregulated state and I'll be sneezing and
Mm.
then I'll do some focusing and then my sneezing goes away.
Ah, cool. I've also noticed, not with specifically the allergies, but sometimes, yeah, that I'll have some sort of thing like something in my throat, or maybe yeah, cough or something, and then I go, oh, what was I just thinking? And it usually there's something that was just happening that seems connected. Yeah, cool. Okay. So back to this research. So I had seen this research. This had a sample size of some 700 people. And what they did is they asked them, and they were, I forget the countries. I don't have that written down here, but it was 2 different countries so that they could make sure that it wasn't a language thing, or they were making sure that they had a good research project. And so they asked people where they felt these emotions in the body. And so you can see that the scale is red and yellow is more feeling and blue is less feeling. And so, for example, somebody who's depressed doesn't have any feeling in the middle here, and has less feeling in the legs and the arms. And so I'll just give you a second to look at some of those. It's kind of, it's neat. And so I had seen this and I was like, oh, that's cool. I wonder what would happen if we drew the felt sense of parts, because we were talking about doing this course with ego states, and so the idea was that, well, each felt sense, and this is the way we teach it at Focusing on Boarding, each felt sense has physical feelings, has memories, has thoughts, and has feelings. So, well, each felt sense of a part would probably also have physical things and be in the body. And so the body card is very simple. This is the link that we shared. And it's a card. It's an outline of a body. And apologies to those who don't like the shape of the body. I think maybe we should create more male and female cards. These are supposed to be gender neutral, but some people think they're not. And the size of the head looks a bit small, and that's because your hair makes it look, but they're supposed to be proportionate. Anywho, so the body card has 3 main parts. So there's the body, where you can draw stuff, the feelings that you have in the body. There's the 4 corners, which are a spot to record the aspects of the felt sense in words, right? So that symbolization that we do. So what are the words to describe the physical sensations, but what feelings came up, what thoughts came up about the experience, and what memories. And then finally a handle for the session. So most of what I'm going to show you today are body cards of parts, because I've been focusing on parts, but we've also used the body cards to record a focusing session, which might be recording and drawing multiple parts, or just recording a session. So they work either way, and the handle, so therefore can be the handle of your focusing session, or can be the handle of, or the name that you've given to a part. Yes. And so actually what we're going to do now is, rather than show you things right away, I'd like to do an exercise first with one of the C's, and then we will continue on, and I'll show you those. So that way I'm not, it's just kind of cool to do it this way. So, so what I'm going to invite you to do, okay. And so, so what I'm going to invite you to do is to get comfortable, and we'll do a little exercise where we will, the first part we're going to do is a written part. So you can obviously you'll open your eyes for the first part. And we're just going to do this first part. It's not quite focusing, but just in the interest of time, to pick a C. So do grab a pen and paper. so that you're ready. So I'll invite you to close your eyes. And we can start with a few deep breaths. And breathing in and holding your breath. And breathing out through your mouth. We'll do that a few more times. Breathing in, holding, and breathing out. And one more. Hold, and breathing out. And I'll invite you to just really get grounded, really feeling your feet on the ground, your sit bones on your chair. Noticing your body, if it wants to move at all or needs to roll your shoulders or stretch your neck, anything to feel more comfortable. And then noticing the sounds. You can hear the rain. It's raining out now. Any other sounds in your space? Maybe the feeling of a current or a draft in your space, or any smells from breakfast. And then just checking inside the body. If anything needs to be cleared in order to be able to do the next exercise. So if there's anything, saying hello to it and just putting it beside you. Maybe putting it in a box and telling it you'll come back to it. And that for now, we're going to do an exercise. So what I'm going to invite you to do, you can open your eyes for this part, is we're just going to go through each of the C's. And in the interest of time, like I said, I'm just going to ask you to rate yourself on the C. And don't think about it. Really just ask your body, what am I right now? How do I feel about this C from 1 to 10? With 1 being low and need more of this C, and 10 being, I'm rocking this, it's good. I think I'm quite satisfied with this C. So the first one was calm, feeling grounded. And the next one, how do you feel about your connectedness, both to yourself and to friends and to family? Curiosity, ability to investigate something and focus, and other ways to be curious.
Maybe a little slower.
I want you to do it fast though. But okay. Clarity. Your sense of being able to be clear about what's happening. Compassion. Your ability to have empathy for yourself and for others, and then to take action. Confidence. You're feeling about being able to take action when you want to. Courage. Your ability to take risks and be vulnerable. And finally, creativity. So now you can just look at the scores you've given yourself and see which one you rated the lowest. And if there's more than one, you might just sit for a moment and see which one you want to focus on. And actually, you might even also not want to focus on the one that you gave the lowest score, so that's fine too. So just taking a moment, closing your eyes, and seeing which one of those C's do you want to spend some time getting to know more of in yourself. And so I'll just read them again. And you can just check more with the felt sense. Yeah, that's the one that I want to spend more time with. So the calm, connectedness, curiosity, clarity, compassion, confidence, courage, and creativity. So now with whatever C you've chosen, I'm going to invite you to remember a specific time or a couple times, but really it's great to pick one where you had that C in your life. So just remembering a time where you were able to have that C, and just remembering, who was there, what did you do, what did you say, any sounds or smells about that. Just bring it back into your consciousness. And now really noticing, what do you feel in your body? What are the physical sensations? Is there a color or a shape or a texture? And are there any emotions in this C and connected to this memory? So just checking now to see what the handle of this is. It might not be the C that you started with. There might be another word or phrase that's a better match for this part of you, this experience. You might ask yourself, what are other times when you felt this way? And the handle is the word or the phrase that summarizes your experience. So it's kind of like the name of the book. And finally, you might have a question that you want to ask this part of yourself. So if you do, you can go ahead and do that. You might ask it how old it is, when the first time it showed up, or what gets in the way of it showing up more often. So I'll give you a few minutes. So in your own time, you can record what you'd like from this exercise. So if you've printed or drawn the outline of the body, you could color or draw where in the body you had sensations with your C, and take any other notes that you'd like about the felt sense. And take note of the handle or the name you gave it, and any other notes. And I'll just give you another 2 minutes or so. So if anybody wants to share something about their experience, their handle, something new that came, you can go ahead and type that into the Q&A. You could take to give people a moment or two more if they need more time and they're taking their notes. So Gigi says, she trusted myself. And the thought was, I'm going to be heard. Beautiful. So there's a question, you're referring to calm and curiosity as part of us. Yes, the part of you that's calm or the part of you that's curious. How does it feel to be curious in your body? How does it feel to be calm? I'm going to show more examples of this in a sec so that maybe some of that will clarify. So Veronica says, I found it very helpful, your invitation to consider what other phrases or words would link to the chosen C for the handle. This really opened the exercise for her beautifully. Thanks, Veronica. Gigi adds, the feelings were calm, open-hearted. The physical sensations were being tall in the room. The memories were teaching yoga. Nice. And Victor shares connectedness, handle, bubbling warmth, body all over skin, heart, chest, solar plexus, uplifting shoulders. Okay, so I'm going to carry on because I do have a fair bit of material still, but thanks for those who shared, and we'll see what some other people's looked like. So the first set of body card examples for flock on the grounded self. So here are some examples from the community. Some of these are mine and some of these are from other people. And the main thing that I notice when I look at these is that there's a lot of yellow that shows up in these grounded places, which is kind of cool. I've labeled some of these as some of the C's. And so here's compassion and here's calmness. And it's neat to notice those two cards are my cards. And I actually had done this exercise. You can see the crayon writing is the same evening. We did a grounded exercise. And that's, thinking of a place that you feel calm and safe and then seeing how it feels in the body. And then we did a self-compassion empathy exercise. And what I noticed was that the energy I felt around my body in the grounded exercise was stronger than in the self-empathy exercise, but that the energy then concentrated in my heart center and in my hands. So that was kind of cool. So I will keep going. And here's some other examples. And yeah, I'll just say here, this slide, this is one of my cards as well. And it's, oh, actually I have it later in the presentation, but it's interesting that I had originally labeled it as manic and rebellious. It was like a negative energy to it. And then I realized, no, it's more an adventurous energy. So sometimes we rename parts, and of course, should say that these parts are not fixed. This, like doing a body card is like taking a picture of yourself, right? It's just like it's a snapshot in time of what you feel at the time. And sometimes we're looking at, patterns of our experiences being a certain way, and so they're a composition of ourselves in that state. But they are we do change, and the parts change, of course. And I'm mostly going to skip over this, but it's just a little bit to say that the breath work exercise that we did in the, so I did a 4-7-8 breath as our introduction, and I just wanted to explain that a little bit. So 4-7-8 breath, you breathe in for a count of 4, you hold for 7, and you breathe out for 8. And so that breathing out for 8 is really activating that flock area, that social engagement parasympathetic, and helps us ground. And so I just think that's such a great breath. I like it more than a standard 4-4-4-4 breath, where you breathe in for 4 and hold for 4 and out for 4 and then wait for 4. So I just wanted to draw that to your attention, even though I did it in the exercise. So I'm going to move on to some fight or flight examples. So fight or flight was like, right, that sympathetic, chaotic feeling. So you can see these ones, this one in the right has like fire everywhere. Chest is on fire, it says. So there's a lot of emotion. It seems overwhelming. It's going out of the body. And then these 3 examples all have a lot happening in the belly. This is one of my cards. It's an anxious card. So there's just like a big ball. And so these ones are wounded. But we also have examples of this chaotic space that are protective, going back to the different types of parts. So these ones are critics. And the colors are here a bit more darker. You see a lot of red and black. And so as you, if you do this work to draw your parts, you might notice that you also are drawn to different colors for different parts of yourself. And then freeze. So the dissociated. So here, what we notice is that there's not a lot happening in the body, right? It's quite empty. There's a little bit of sensation. And so these first 2 are quite wounded. They, for example, this one here says it's a traitor. And it's using it to numb. So there's feeling, but you're trying to get away from the feeling. And whereas this is a part of one of my parts, an analyzer part. It's a very active, intellectual kind of part, but has no feeling in the rest of the body. And that one, it's not very hurt. The hurt is much more buried. It's above a hurt part, and it's just managing life and getting things done. I'm just going to read this quote from this person's drawing, which wasn't on a body card, but it's interesting. So this is my childhood self. The red in the center is my feeling and emotional self. It is not safe to let these things out of my body. Around that center swirl of hot lava are 4 vice devices, which I spend all my energy and concentration keeping engaged to hold my feelings in. As hard as I try, some escapes my body through my eyes, which frightens me. The rest of my body has little sensation by comparison, and I have trouble discerning where my physical self stops and starts. And so you can see this is actually a very wounded part, but the emotion is just really squeezed, and it's quite a dissociated, mostly numbed out state. So flee or fixate, process skipping. So now we're moving up in the model, and these behaviors that get us out of feeling in a way. So here's an example of an addicted card. You can see a lot happening there. And you can see that there's lots of connected to trauma with lots of family members named. And shame. Shame is often part, right, of the addicted self. There's shame that drives some of those behaviors. These two cards on the right are my own cards, and there's a pleasing behavior. So just, I used to have a part of me that would do things just to make people happy, and a numbing part. And I'll say more about those in a bit. So I'll pause and see if there's any questions. Henry, is there anything we should address?
People have given their responses. They've been sharing.
Sure.
Would you like to hear them?
Sure. Why don't we take a moment?
So Steve said he explored courage and was surprised by the handle, which was bravely small and big. Jenny shared that her color was yellow as well. Melanie, confidence, the handle was balance, and I felt warmth in my core. And there's a technical question.
Okay. Beautiful. Okay. So I've already shown you most of these cards. So I talked a bit about grounded versus self-empathy and the difference in feeling. So noticing the different feeling states. I'll point out this adventure versus professional. They're very similar, and then also analyzer. So my professional self is a combination of this analyzer intellectual self, but also has more creativity and adventure in it. So it's kind of neat once you do these different cards, then you look at them and you say, oh yeah, that's like that. Like I said, this like dance floor piece that these parts are kind of compositions or you know, they're as big or as small as you decide to draw the boundaries around them. And in fact, there's a part of me that for a long time was quite strong, which was like a good girl part, but I don't actually have a body good girl part because I actually have a number of cards that fit into my good girl, which would be, for example, the pleaser and the critic. They're just both parts, they're kind of subparts of that part. So one of the cool, oh yes, sorry, I forgot. So, so I mentioned that we can use these cards to record a session. And so this is a card that I did after it was a while ago that I was dating somebody, and I had, was picking them up and they weren't ready, and I got really angry because they weren't responding to the text messages either. I was waiting for them. And so I just drove away. I just left. And then I was like, oh, wow, I can't believe I just did that, because it seemed impulsive. And so I did a session thinking of when I have run away, and then I found a bunch of examples. And so this is a composite of all the felt sense of the examples of me running away. And you can notice, like, so there in here, this part is connected to my anxious self. The energy in the hands is similar to what I've done for kind of divine feminine energy of having agency and balance about myself in the world. And then there's also parts in here that are connected to the hurt part. And you know, you'll have your way of symbolizing. So sometimes we're drawing actual feelings, and then sometimes we add symbols in. So some people have, for example, on a part that's confident, have drawn a cape on themselves because they're like, they feel like a superhero. So they add some element to it. For myself, with the pressure in the chest, I often feel like it's a pressure in my chest that I'm working with that's kind of covering up or protecting my heart. And so I for some reason have drawn that often as a heart with like some sort of tension. Anywho. So the back of the cards. So one neat thing that you can do with the back of the cards is to draw a picture of a metaphor or yourself in the situation. And so I'll just point out a few. So the analyzer part is this one here. So it's me with books and a computer. It's by yourself, isolated. It's very safe by itself. And then the two that were really interesting to me was, so this one here is the adventurous part, and I happened to draw it as a butterfly, and the anxious was a caterpillar. And actually, if you look at the adventure part, I wrote on here, you know, it can do whatever it wants. It's not bound by rules, and it can fly. So that's why I drew the butterfly. But I didn't consciously think that I was drawing a butterfly and a caterpillar. That's what happened. And then when I was looking at the cards, I was like, oh, that's so interesting. Because it's true that I can't be taking risks and being adventurous and being courageous if I'm in anxious. I usually I'm in one or the other. So that's kind of neat. And then just to point out this one here, I'm going to go back, I guess. So this one here, this pleaser part has this hand up and is the, you know, over volunteering. And the insight from doing that art was that, oh, when I over volunteer, I make myself small. I don't spend enough attention with myself and what I need and stuff. So, so some of this is, you know, emotional intelligence and getting a sense of the balance between yourself and others. And that social engagement system is complicated, right? If we overgive, we can get compassion fatigue. And if we undergive, we can be unhappy because we're not connected. Okay. And then the last thing I'll say on this part is that this card up here is, and I didn't do a bigger one, but it's the dialogue. And so you can actually kind of plot out your parts as they relate to each other. And so, for example, the critic might have something different to say to many parts. And so mapping out that dialogue is a way to identify parts, for one thing. Because if you have a voice in your head that's saying something, you're saying, well, that's not coming from this perspective or that perspective. It's a way to identify a part. And sometimes you'll notice that it's hard. Like I said, the good girl, you might not have a lot of feeling in the body. And so sometimes you find a different way to identify a part, and dialogue is, I think, a natural way to do that with thoughts that don't seem to identify to anybody, that any part of yourself that you've identified.
I have a question here by Victor. How many body cards do you use or draw during a single session? One or many?
Great question. I think normally in a single session, you would draw one or two cards. You would usually have maybe identified 2 parts or maybe 3 parts. And you could record each of those parts. This work that I'm showing you is kind of the compilation of really years of work, because we started this work in 2015. So and most of these cards were created in 2015-16. So it's a couple years of work of slowly over time, as I'm working through things, identifying different parts and creating the card. And how do you use the cards is that sometimes if you have a stuck situation before focusing, you might bring out the cards and kind of get remind yourself of what parts you know are involved in an issue, and what the patterns are and some of the details. And so when you go back into your felt sense, you've just helped yourself with your journaling, right? Because this is a form of journaling ultimately of what you already know, and so you can more quickly get to the edge, I think, and learn new stuff with focusing. Okay, so and so in 2017 at Focusing on Boredom, we did a course on timelines. And because I had done the work of creating these parts, I was able, when I did my timeline of important events that had happened in my life, to plot onto the timeline when certain parts had appeared. Because they didn't always exist, all of them. Our parts are parts of our personality are, like we saw earlier with Richard Schwartz, internal family systems. They're responses to trauma sometimes, and ways of needing to be, or they're just as we grow. You can see here, I actually drew, when I connected some of the parts, I noticed this grouping of 5 grounded places that seem to be growing. And so I drew this growing green section. So it's both growth and well, even, I guess to some degree, even developing parts to protect ourselves as growth, right? We're moving forward as much as we can, but to some degree that moving forward means that a process is stopped if there's a wound there underneath it that isn't healed. And so focusing is great work, right? To go back to that original wound and be with it and go through it, and to carry it forward. And so a couple things to point out here. So I have the caterpillar and the butterfly, which I mentioned earlier as being the anxious, wounded part, and then this grounded adventure part. But it's neat to note that so I put adventure here because that fairly recently, when I was doing focusing work, is when I reframed that part. I renamed it adventure from being rebellious or manic. But I knew from my story that it had actually shown up when I was in grade 1, and a part of me had, well, I had stolen crayons from my babysitter is what I did. And I went to school and I was showing my friends these pretty colors that I liked. And I had justified it because the babysitter had 2 sons. So I said, oh, they don't need the pretty girl color, so I can take those. Anywho, but then I didn't like the feeling in my body. I got scared of the feeling that I got in my body of having done this, of breaking the rules, essentially. And so I really wasn't very adventurous and was a pretty good girl for a long time, in a way, because I got rid of that. So the anxious and avoiding things and following rules is kind of back there, and then adventure shows up there. The other thing that's kind of neat is that you can have more than one spot. I don't have it on here. So this grounded place is an example in my backyard gardening. This one here is from hiking in Algoma. And I have another one, which is from when I was young, we had a family cottage, and that was on the lake was called the Lac Vert. And each of those spots have slightly different grounded feelings. So that's why having a different handle and a more precise handle of that feeling is so lovely. And then you can use that handle to go back to that feeling in the body. So the handle can be a way to jump into that. So sometimes when we're feeling overwhelmed and we want to get grounded, knowing that those spots, so if I just say Algoma, it can already start to calm me down, because Algoma is connected to all these things. So it becomes like a shortcut. So with the professional spot part, it's interesting that this part of me is for most of my career so far, I've been a project manager. And so I drew myself as a conductor because I don't write the music, but I make things work. I'm having people do things. And what I don't have on here, which is emerging, I do have this teacher card here. But what's emerging is an entrepreneurial self of doing this kind of focusing teaching, and what can I do with that beyond teaching classes, and a desire to merge it with business in my MBA. And so that's like an emerging part. So of course the timeline and parts, like I said, emerge. And I'll do the process skip on the next slide. The other thing that was neat in doing the timeline is I noticed that this protector part actually emerged as a need for community, that there was this community element coming through. And so while the over volunteering hurt me in some ways because I overextended myself, it also helped me grow my connection to community, which was a need. Okay. So there's a question, Earth and the globe. I haven't thought about it a lot. I do know about ecopsychology. Sorry, I don't know if I read the question properly. So have you thought about doing this in relation to our relations with the Earth or the globe? And so I know a bit about ecopsychology, and I actually right now I'm just starting to read a process model. So I kind of want to read that first. And then, yes, I would love to do more work connected to the globe. So maybe Henry will pause and see if there's anybody else who has a question.
Sure. I want to, while people are typing, just give my understanding and perhaps a question as well. So it sounds like with these cards, there's a mapping of the inner landscape and a taking note, a history, and one can see patterns and also refer to them more easily if one wants to work on an issue continuously over a longer period of time. So I have two questions from that. One is, how does this, I guess, how can the map making or the timeline making, how is that focusing as well? Is that a creative, emergent process, or is it a, I guess, you know, you're a scribe and you're kind of tracing what's already been formed?
Yeah.
And yeah, so that's one question. And the second question, I guess, is what might be some directions for it? Is there a direction towards wholeness, towards parts becoming a community, becoming a tree, like they all unite together to form some other organism?
Yeah. So I think that you're right. A lot of this is the scribing, the journaling after the focusing session. But then because you've done that work and you've maybe crystallized it a bit, when you are focusing, it's just a short form way. So for myself, if I say, okay, this is the wounded part, or I know what that means, and I don't necessarily feel the need to articulate that. It's a summary. So it comes into the focusing in that way, and then you keep going. You're like, because you're always when focusing, right? You're always at the edge and learning more. But it's just a way to say the history in a summarized way.
Sorry, so one can imagine that every session with a particular part, their body card would change, their image would change. They might merge with somebody else, or
Yeah.
they would have colors in different places in the body.
Yeah, I think if you did the body sense of that felt sense each time, it would change, and certainly over time, I've noticed that if I do have an anxious part that's active, I'm drawing it smaller, so I can see a progression over time of a shift in the size of the anxious. It's not always gone. There's still sometimes anxious that shows up, but it's not as big. And then actually my next slide will have some of this, how the protector parts, some of them, they just change, they transform. And so there's this idea of going like, so they show up less. And actually one of the ways I talk about it sometimes is that all of these parts are kind of like characters in a play. And so your life is the play and the stage is your life. And so a lot of the time they're not on stage, right? They're just, they might be there, but they're in the back wings, and they've played their role, and we're now into the part of the story where they're not part of the story that often. And like I said, doesn't mean that they can't come back in a smaller way at some point. Yeah. But and because of that, by that very nature, right, the part that is playing has all the energy. And so the part of the self, this grounded self, it's getting all the energy, it's using a lot of the energy, and the other parts are just kind of either gone or mostly dormant.
Okay, thanks.
So maybe I'll do the next couple slides because I want to make sure we have time to do the last exercise. So I've talked a bit about crossing parts. One of the things I did when we did that class on working through a problem, I actually, for myself, my problem was learning to love myself more. And so I worked with compassion quite a bit. And the story I have is this protector part. So this is me eating pizza. And what I noticed was, for a while there, especially when I was doing the pleaser over volunteering, there was just too much going on, and I'd find myself going out for a slice of pizza for dinner instead of cooking. And the critic voice was saying things like, you're going to get fat, you're wasting money, you're being lazy, and it just wasn't very nice. And when I was able to bring in compassion and dialogue with it, then it kind of shifted, and then the voice that showed up was saying, oh, you're working too hard. We need to create more space for relaxation. With what can we schedule? And so the critic part got more silent, and the compassionate part came in instead. But the action was the same. Like, if I might still go eat pizza sometimes, I might still need a break, but there was a shift in the way the dialogue in my head went. And a second example, which is even more about compassion, was I was in a situation one time where I wasn't feeling comfortable with the situation, and so there was a part of me that was active that was scared, and then there was the other part of me that was quite grounded and compassionate and saying, oh yeah, you're scared, and we need to leave, and formulated a plan to leave. And so it's interesting, as we're more grounded, we can have one part that's quite activated and another part that's still quite grounded, and those two parts can be dialoguing together. And so you can do that in a focusing session, but I guess you carry that into your own life too, and you can do it in live situations. And then, so courage. And so I think courage, sometimes the courage thing is being with the emotions and going through them and being able to sit with them. And one thing we can talk about is growing our window of tolerance. So what that means is being able to stay grounded with difficult emotions. And often we need to do that with a therapist sometimes, or a focusing partner. We need that anchor to be able to do that work. But we can also, as we grow these seeds and grow our grounded place, we can do some of it on our own. The thing that I thought was kind of cool when I did this work was that I was working with two wounded parts, and I realized that the reason the older wounded part was such an issue was because of a younger wounded part, that they were connected. And so that was very interesting. And some of that work I did, I actually had an experience where I was crying. So I was in the sympathetic. There was a lot of emotion, but I was still, a part of me was grounded and courageous and wanting to to hear from that part, and journaling. So kind of coming up, journaling, and making sure you capture the words and then going back in. Because I think sometimes, and there's ways that we do this in focusing, right? Like thinking at the edge, where somebody is journaling for you or taking notes. And sometimes those words can be so powerful in understanding the story. And so I'll just close with this quote. And so this kind of wraps it all together, that insight involves our ability to shape and tell our story in a way that is both coherent and that maintains emotional contact with its meaning. We are neither overwhelmed by nor disconnected from what happened to us, and we have a developing sense of meaning about our pathway through life. Only through integrating of the limbic-based memory, and that limbic is the emotional, with the capacities of the middle prefrontal region, and that middle prefrontal is the part of the brain that can, sorry?
The watchtower, was that it? Or
Yeah, it might be the watchtower.
Or thinking. The prefrontal cortex is about like planning.
Yeah, that's right. My notes are confusing me right now. But anyways, but connecting those two pieces, the ability to keep track of time and to integrate and to be both grounded and with the emotion, all of those things coming together is what allows us in our brain to have this integration and to be able to create a story. And being able to tell your story is hugely helpful in healing and just feeling like that you know the story, that there's not gaps, that there's details along the whole way. I'll just re-say that a different way. For trauma and stuck parts, wounded parts, for them to be healed, you need to have the whole brain online. And so to bring it back to what we started with, the social engagement system, the modern prefrontal brain, which I didn't talk much about, but that the connecting of the thinking part, which we do in focusing, right? We're putting into words. The part of us that's putting into words is using the more modern brain. And then the part of us that's having sensation in the body is more the emotional brain. So putting those two together is what allows us to integrate our memories. And I can also add that there's different ways to do this to help us in therapy. People use EMDR and hypnosis. People are experimenting with ecstasy. I just was listening to a podcast the other day with Tim Ferriss, who's interviewing somebody who's doing neat things with MDMA, and that can not only process things that we're consciously aware of, but they go back into like your birth process and even past life stuff. So, I mean, there's all kinds of stuff that you can work on, and when you can have that, when those pieces get integrated into a story, it's because you can describe it and tell it. You're not in it anymore, and you're not flooded by it. You've processed it. So hopefully that was clear-ish. Yeah, I think I forgot to put one piece in my notes here, but that's okay. Yeah, so any questions on this part? And then we'll do our last experiential. There's just a comment here from Marianne that says, focusing is such a good way to help develop our more subtle connections in the integration process. Okay, so we'll keep going, and then if you had any other questions, we can take those at the end. All right, so So just to remind us, we've had the 8 C's. You did the first experiment on the C. So you might want to use that C again in this experience. Or you might like to pick another C. There'll be a little bit of time to bring back your C in the experience. So if you want to pick another one, you can. But it might be more, it probably will be a deeper experience for you if you pick the original C that you had. So I'm just gonna go on. So, so I'll invite you to, again, close your eyes and really sink back into your body. And we can take another 4, 7, 8 breath together. So breathing in, holding, and breathing out through your mouth. And just going deep down. And so what we're going to do in this exercise is we're going to cross a C with an issue in your life and notice any parts that we have connected to it. So first check maybe what issue you'd like to work on. So I want you to ask your body what's something that you've been feeling a bit torn about is a good way to ask your body, or something that's been feeling a little stuck in your life that you'd like to have some clarity on. So you don't want to pick the biggest issue you've ever had, right? You want to pick something medium or small medium, something maybe not too complicated, but something where there's definitely a feeling of torn, something where you're wanting to go one way or another. And then we're not going to get too into the issue right now. We're just going to put it beside us. And I'll give you a moment also to clear any space if there's anything else that's coming up that you need to give yourself a moment to put any other issues aside, visualizing perhaps putting them beside you, knowing that you'll come back to them later. And what we're going to do now is we're going to bring back into our consciousness the C that your body knows you need for this issue. So, oh, and I should have said you should pick an. If you did want to work with the C you had before, you could actually ask your body, what is an issue in my life where having more of this C would help? So if you haven't got your C yet, I'm just going to go back through the list and you can see which one resonates. And if you haven't picked one, you can go, oh yeah, that's the one. And if you already have your C, you can just keep bringing it back into your awareness by reminding yourself about the details of the C in the first exercise and maybe going a bit deeper. So calmness, connectedness, curiosity, clarity, compassion, confidence, courage, or creativity. So reminding yourself of the time when you were that C, when it did go well. And who was there and when was it, what happened, all that stuff. And noticing how it feels in your body. Maybe this C, if you've got the same C, does it feel different than the first exercise? Has it shifted already as they do? Where are you carrying it in your body emotionally? What feelings are in that felt sense of this C? And seeing if there's any thoughts that are coming up, any feelings toward all of this. And finally, just checking if the handle has shifted or if you need to get a new handle, if you have a new C. Is the C word you picked the handle, or is there a better one, more accurate one? So now I'll invite you to put that C, that part of you, aside. Just ask it to sit beside you. And I'll invite you to bring in the issue that more of this C could help with. And so I'll just invite you to, for about 30 seconds, remind yourself of the details of this issue. You know, what's involved, the various thoughts about it. And then once you've gone over the gist of the details, sink into your body and notice how you feel physically. And now noticing what the thoughts are with the issue. And noticing if you can tease out the different perspectives. Are there maybe thoughts about wanting to go in one direction, do this thing versus not do this thing? Or whatever the issue is, what are the different perspectives? And are these perspectives familiar to you? Do they come from different parts of yourself? Now, some of you might have a part that seems too loud, that it's so loud that you can't hear other parts. And if that's the case, you can ask that part to step back and see if it will step back. And if that's the case, then you can see what changes in your body, what physical shift happens, what other part comes forward. Or if there's a part that seems loud that doesn't want to move, try being curious with it, asking it something, asking it what it wants you to know. So hopefully by now, you might have a sense of 2 parts that are involved in this issue. You might have more. There might be 3 or 4. But for now, picking the 2 main ones that you want to work on right now. So we'll say part A and B. So picking a first part that you want to zero in on. I want to ask it, who are you? So we want to get a handle of this part. We want to kind of maybe ask ourselves, when else have we noticed this part in us? Sometimes when was the first time this part showed up? And what part of the physical felt sense is connected to this part? Another way to ask it is, what's another time that I've felt this physical feeling in my body? And checking to see if there's an emotional quality there as well. And finally, what thoughts does it have about this issue? Does it have anything new to say? And what name does part A have? So now we'll take a deep breath. We'll ask part A to sit beside your C. And we'll now invite part B into the picture more fully. So what does part B have to say so far about this issue? Now scanning the body, seeing what the felt sense in the physical body of this part's perspective is. And when else have you felt this? And are there any emotional feelings in there? And finally, does it have anything new to say now about this issue? And what's the name of part B? And now bringing all three parts kind of into your consciousness, kind of beside you. You've got part A and part B and your C. And now let's see what part C has to say. What does C say to part A and to part B, and how do they respond? And just listening to that dialogue for a few moments, and then noticing any shift that happens in the body and what information that comes from that. And then that's the end of the exercise, and you'll have a few minutes to record whatever comes. So we'll be back in a few minutes. And so if you have anything you want to share, you can add those into the Q&A now. Or if you have a question that has come up from anything in today's presentation, we have about 10 minutes left for questions and reflections. And so we'll take those as you provide them. So what didn't get that there was a third part, part C involved. So part C was your C, or the part that we chose at the beginning, one of your C's. So that was part C. Henry, there's a question on the replay. I think the recording will be shared with all participants, right? Yes, nodding yes. So you will be able to listen to it again. So Gigi says, focusing on the clarity part gave me the insight that I need to focus a long time on the young exiled part so that the second part, which was compassion, could be stronger. Do you want me to, Henry, I can just keep reading some of them for now?
Sure.
Okay. So Donna said, your presentation slides and exercises were excellent. I am feeling so excited about the crossing of focusing and self-leadership. Thank you for doing this. Thanks, Donna.
The reason I clicked Esther Live is so that it shows up to the other participants so they can read it too.
Okay, great. So there were three parts, three. Well, there was the C that you chose, and then whatever parts that came up for you. So some people might have had a critical part, or you might have, it depends on the parts and what came up for people. So maybe some will share what their part A and part B was, and that will help you, Victor. Rebecca, this has been fabulous and very valuable. Many thanks. Thanks, Rebecca. Anonymous. As Clarity sat with Kent and Ken, I noticed that connectedness joined the group very helpfully. I noticed that the C's are all core self qualities. Another C. Yeah.
Core
Thank
self.
you. Yeah. I wanted to read this little bit from, so The Body Keeps the Score by Bessel van der Kolk is a great book. And the bit when I was explaining the integration of the storyline, I kind of really messed that up. And so I'll just read this couple sentences. He says that the area of the brain that provides a sense of time and perspective, which is possible to know that that was then, but I am safe now. And another area that integrates the images, sounds, and sensations of trauma in a coherent story. Those two parts, when they're not online, you can't be processing, but when they're online, sorry, I'll just read. So when those parts of the brains are knocked out, you experience something not as an event with a beginning, middle, and an end, but as fragments of sensations, images, and emotion, so that you get stuck in the emotion. And the two parts of the brain, so the first part, which is the sense of time and perspective, is the dorsolateral prefrontal cortex. And the second part of integration is the thalamus. So for those of you who want to know more about that part of the brain, you can look it up. I am not an expert on the brain, but it's interesting, right? So having a sense of time and having the part of the brain online, not being overwhelmed. So when you're grounded, you can, that part of the brain that is that prefrontal cortex, thalamus, and comes together. Anyways, okay.
Did he ask what page that is from?
Oh, yes. For those of you who have the book, it is page 219. 219 in the book. Okay.
Oh, I'm going to read another one here by Anonymous. Part A was wounded part, red, black, shadow. Part B was CIA agent, hypervigilant, black and white, sharp, numb, who needed to protect A. C was calm, turquoise, who knew there was nothing wrong with A ever. And B didn't keep protecting A all the time. It could rest.
Beautiful.
That really helps me to understand how, like you mentioned the stage thing, and they're not really, it doesn't seem like they're, in this case, that they're changing or combining, but they're kind of taking different places.
Yeah. And that idea, there were different levels. There's the wounded, there's the manager that comes in a lot of the time. And then if the manager fails in a way, you go up to the next level, like the firefighter or the process keeping comes in. And so they're all just trying to manage to keep you safe. I think the bottom line, yes, you read too fast, sorry. The quote in the book, probably I read too fast, but it's time and integration. If you can have the part of you that keeps track of time and the part of the brain that can integrate, then you're able to heal.
Oh yeah, I remember that they were finding that people with PTSD and their flashbacks, those places in their brain would deactivate. They had no sense of time and couldn't, it was just like fragments of sensation.
Right. Yeah, and you hear stories, right? Like somebody hears a firework and they think they're in their war zone, but it's a firework.
Yeah.
And so yeah, they're not like, oh, I'm here and now and I'm safe. They're back. They've gone back in time.
Right. It's very focusing. It's like that somatic memory hasn't been ascribed and turned into a chronological memory.
Yeah. And what I think Jenlin says is that it's stopped, right? It hasn't carried forward yet.
Mm-hmm.
It's a stoppage. The name of the book again. So it's The Body Keeps the Score, Brain, Mind, and Body in the Healing of Trauma by Bessel van der Kolk. And he mentions focusing in a footnote. Oh, well. So he knows about it, but it's not in the book, but the book is a great book. Do you want to do Karen's or shall I?
Okay, just someone said thank you, very helpful and interesting. Oh, so at least one of these anonymous people is Judy, thank you. Karen says, yeah, so grateful to receive the recording in PDF, which you will, and so that you can listen to it again. Annette, you succinctly and beautifully weave in theory and practice, creativity and content, and the experiential processes of focusing. And Karen, you can reach me at henry@focusing.org if you don't get it, but you will receive it. But you should receive it from Elizabeth. All right, people, congratulating you, amazing, thank you. Victor says, what I got is the possible coercion of creativity and connectedness. They are separate in me most of the time. I write for whom? Is there any real connectedness in my writing? Moving in the direction. I'm suspicious if coercion is some other word.
Yeah, maybe Victor, you can clarify if you, or could clarify a bit more what you mean.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Veronica says, thank you. So see your cards and timeline was inspirational. Much appreciated.
You're
Also,
welcome.
Colleen, thank you so much. That was so helpful, and I'm excited to continue this. As our time is ending, oh wait, let's see here. Oh, I want to share this. From Donna, my themes were courage and creativity and the surfacing of a sacred part.
The scared
part. Oh, sorry, scared part. Little one who is shy and reluctant to risk, holding back, which was helpful to focus on the positive self qualities to bring forth felt sense to forward movement to blossom. I love how you wrote that. Poetic.
Poetic, yeah.
Yeah, coercion. Oh, by coercion, Victor means cooperation or coexistence. Yes, I hear you then. Yes.
Yes.
Okay.
Yes.
So yeah,
they work together.
Yeah. We're at the hour. Do you mind stopping your share, Annette?
Sure. Yeah. So I'm going to stop the share.
Yeah. So I want to thank people for joining us today.